Hello and welcome to our When I Dare to Be Powerful conference, podcast and online talk series. This is one in a series of podcasts and online conversations we are having relating to voice as an agent of change. The talks will run every week right up to our one day When I Dare to Be Powerful conference in June. The conference will bring filmmakers, artists, writers and activists together with conceptual thinkers and cultural theorists as we ask what voice means to us and hopefully provoke thinking relating to using voice as acts of resistance. Our one-day in-person conference takes place on the 21st of June. You'll also find the details relating to our podcasts, online talks, and of course, you'll find the full conference programme itself. You'll also be able to register to attend, so please do come along. We're looking forward to seeing as many people there as possible. The link for our website is When I Dare to Be Powerful Conference, all one word, .wordpress.com. You'll also find the link on the New Art Exchange website and the Bonington Gallery website. We're grateful that our When I Dare to Be Powerful International Conference and Talks have been sponsored and is supported by Midlands 3 Cities, Midlands 4 Cities, Bonington Gallery and the New Art Exchange. Today, I'm really pleased to welcome our guest, Jatavia M. Gary. Jatavia is a filmmaker and multidisciplinary artist working across film, video art, sculpture and installation. Jatavia aims to destabilize notions of objectivity and neutrality in nonfiction storytelling by asserting a Black feminist subjectivity in films and installations that serve as reparative gestures for the distorted histories through which Black life is often viewed. Black sociality, familial bonds, the interiority of Black women and femmes, and the global efforts towards liberation often pull focus in Gary's multivalent work and forms the context to our conversation today. Jatavia, hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
We're really happy to be in conversation with you. So if we go straight in, for anyone unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe it?
Well, I mean, it really depends if we're talking about the films or are we talking about the objects. I would say that the works are in some ways heirlooms, right? Heirlooms that I am attempting to create and leave behind for future generations of Black people so that they can navigate their realities here on Earth with some sort of context of the past and with an expansive, imaginative terrain for the future. So the works are in some ways evading categorization, right? So that's why it's hard for me to kind of encapsulate what they are. But they are film works, cinematic, time-based works that are utilizing archival materials and avant-garde or experimental filmmaking techniques along with documentary conventions, right? We want to really push a new cinematic language and try to think through how we can expand the bounds of documentary film and film in general, right? How can narrative be a radical opportunity for reimagining our lives here on Earth?
That's wonderful. That summarizes it so beautifully. And I really love the idea that you've used of them as being heirlooms. You work with archive. Would you consider your pieces as archival pieces?
They definitely have archival material involved. I don't know if I would say, I don't know. I think that's a lot of this kind of definition and response I am leaving in the hands of the viewer and the audience member. In some ways, yes, they are archival pieces because, again, the aim is for someone in the distant or not so distant future to come across these materials, to come across these objects, these films, and be moved, right, and be inspired and have some sort of navigation, some sort of way of navigating. They're kind of way-making devices, if you will. So, yeah, I guess in some ways they are, in their own respects, archival materials or archival pieces, because they are part of this quote unquote larger canon, that they do exist for future audiences, future viewers to come along and engage with. So perhaps, yes.
Yeah, I can see that. They talk of a time, they talk of a context, of a social setting, a situation. I think they're beautiful pieces. So for this conversation, what I'd like to do is, if we can focus on three of your works, the Giverny document, Giverny 1, Négresse Impériale, and An Ecstatic Experience. Thinking first about the Giverny document, which is about, as you described, the safety and bodily autonomy of Black women. Wonderful film for me, layered, extremely emotive and emotional. And in it, you interview women in Harlem, asking them how safe they feel in the city. And some said they felt safe. But then when you drilled down, most actually didn't feel that safe and gave examples as to why, which is so representative of women everywhere. That's how we live our lives. But I was surprised, and perhaps naively, by the number of women who said the Lord made them feel safe. And for me, that sense of responsibility for themselves, that sort of relinquishing it to a man, many perceive the Lord as being male. And I just wondered what your reflections were regarding that.
I think in some ways it was a surprise, right? It was kind of shocking to hear folks invoke the Lord, or invoke this kind of spiritual faith in regard to their safety. But in other ways, it was not surprising at all. You know, just a little biographical context about myself. I descend from a very long line of Pentecostal preachers, right? People who would say things like that all the time, and still say things like that all the time. Oh, I walk with God. God is walking with me. Spirit is walking with me. And indeed, I understand that in some ways, hold on to that ethos as well. But for me, it's focused in a way that is, I guess, a non-traditional ethos. Or perhaps it is traditional in that I'm considering the Lord, right, or spirit within the context of a West African traditional spiritual practice, right? So for me, I might say something like, oh, well, my ancestors are walking with me, right? Or perhaps Elegba is walking with me, or Yemonja is walking with me. So it was in some sense a surprise, but in other sense, it fits, right, with the kind of historical practices of spirituality that Black people have leaned on for hundreds, no, thousands of years, whether we're talking about, you know, Christianity, which is of course rife with its own contradictions, and you know, we can definitely critique the Christian church. We can definitely even critique the Black spiritual tradition, or whether we're talking about the kind of primordial practices that have existed before colonization, before the period of enslavement and forced conversion. Black people have always foregrounded spirit, and a lot of our help comes from, right, the Lord, the space that we cannot see. So, you know, in some ways that was a bit shocking. And in other ways, it was kind of heartening in a way. Although, you know, I do not have the same relationship with the Black church that I did growing up. Again, I have a very strong critique of the space, but I can understand how a 60-year-old woman, right, from North Carolina might say, oh, no, I walk with God, or a 65-year-old woman from Grenada or Guyana might say, oh no, the Lord is with me, so I shall fear not, right? Because that is what has brought us through. Yeah. That is what has gotten us to this point, even today.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah,
complex.
Yeah,
complex.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, when you describe it that way, then yes, I understand it. But yeah, absolutely. But what it did do, though, because they were talking, you were asking about how safe they feel when they go out and so on. It reminded me about the June Jordan poem. I don't know if you know it, a poem about my rights.
Yes, I do believe I know it, but give me a little, give me a
Right,
little
yeah.
piece of it.
I'm glad you asked me because I have it right. It's a long poem, but it really, for me, when I first encountered it, it really stirred a rage in me that I fall back on. Which is a very useful rage, but I'll just read the first section. Even tonight, and I need to take a walk and clear my head about the poem, about why I can't go out without changing my clothes, my shoes, my body posture, my gender identity, my age, my status as a woman, alone in the evening, alone on the streets, alone not being the point being that I can't do what I want to do with my own body because I am the wrong sex, the wrong age, the wrong skin, and suppose it was not here in the city, but down on the beach or far into the woods, and I wanted to go there by myself, thinking about God or thinking about children or thinking about the world, all of it disclosed by the stars and the silence. I could not go, and I could not think, and I could not stay there alone, as I need to be, alone because I cannot do what I want to do with my own body, and who in the hell set things up like this? And it goes on. But just wonderful for me that
Absolutely.
encompassed, the feeling, that real sense of the injustice that there is in terms of we actually live every day and not able to be who we really want to be or how we want to be. And that's what that reminded me of, actually.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you shared that with me because it really invokes not just my experiences when I was living in Brooklyn, when I was making this work, but also my experiences when I was in the garden, in Giverny, France, in the countryside, the northern part of France, in the countryside. There were moments where I definitely felt like I am at risk, right? And this is a space that's incredibly bucolic. It's historical. It's art historical. It is a place where tourism is encouraged, and where people are, the elite are enjoying a nice glass of Calvados, right? And a nice pastry. But even in this setting, even in this space, I had to consider my exit plan if anything were to happen.
Dear, oh dear.
I had to think about protecting myself, pardon me. I had to think about what I would do, if this person decided to follow me, right? Even when I was working, I was filming at one point in a wildflower field, and it was a pretty remote space. And there was a male jogger, and he passed me. But then about maybe 10 minutes later, he looped back around and he stopped to talk to me. And he's covered in sweat, and he's speaking French, and he's asking to film me with the camera that I am working with. He's asking for a hug. He's asking for a kiss.
Goodness.
At this point, I have to then begin to think about, okay, what am I going to do if this goes awry, right? So I begin to pack up my materials. I begin to close down my travel tripod, and I hold it across my chest so that he can know that I am in fact armed, right? I am in fact thinking about, I'm going to preserve my life by hook or by crook. Right. So even in this space where, we were supposed to be focused on leisure and creativity and inspiration, and, artistic production, I'm having to foreground, ideas around safety and my own embodiment. And so this is how the concept for this work began to take shape, even in the garden. Right.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And I can see why you say it that the June Jordan poem reminded you of that. Absolutely. So not able to basically just concentrate on the work, your creativity, what you're trying to capture, what you're trying to do. Were you filming on your own? I had the sense that someone else was there, but you were filming on your own.
There were certain parts of the film where I was indeed filming on my own.
Right.
But when I am in the frame, I definitely had a partner, a young woman who was also a resident at the space. Her name was Molly de Grazia, and she was a sculptor who also worked in video. And so she was able to, help me press the play button, right, and give me feedback. But I was definitely lining up the shots and composing the shots and placing myself within the frame. Yeah. But when I am not in the frame, I am definitely filming everything else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Beautiful.
It was a fun, despite the dangers, right, or the potential dangers, it was a really transformative experience.
And can we talk about the process of filmmaking? I'm really interested in how artistic ideas are realised, the motivation for them, how they reach to completion. So this was really very involved, layered in texture, meaning images, audio, archive, original footage, emotive, stirring, an angry piece. I felt.
Definitely.
How did it begin? What was it storyboarded? To what extent do you carry out detailed planning? How much spontaneity is in your work?
I would say there is a great deal of planning, but there's also a great deal of spontaneity and improvisation. In fact, I rely often on, improvisation. I would say it began in the garden. I found myself there as a resident. This was my first artist residency in 2016 in Giverny, France. And, for a very long time, we were there for 2 months. And for maybe the first 2 weeks, I was very depressed, right? I was very kind of out of my element, out of my context. And there was all of this violence occurring. I don't know if you remember the summer of 2016, but it was quite bloody. You had the police murders of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. You had the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida, where I want to say around 50 queer people were harmed, were murdered. And
I do remember.
Then you had the kind of nonstop immigration situation at sea, where boats were capsizing and people were being lost at sea. So I am hearing all of this. I am seeing all of this on my feed, on the news, on the radio, on the laptop, on social media, on Twitter. And I'm completely disturbed, right? Because I am not within my usual context, which would be my friends, my family, my support system. So I'm kind of spiraling a bit in the garden, right? But then I pull it together because I say, when is the next time you'll ever be in a place like this, right? With so much historical resonance, so many layers of history. And what can you do here? How can you use this context to begin to work through and transmute the kind of psychologically destabilizing reality that you find yourself in? And so I begin to place myself in the garden. After hours, they would allow me kind of full range of the space. During the day, during the working hours, thousands of people are trafficking in and out of the garden because, again, it is a tourist spot. Schools, groups of people, retirement groups, folks from the city, folks from Paris, folks from all over Europe, folks from Japan, right? Because there's a huge garden culture in Japan. But after hours, they allowed me to play in this space. And as someone who has a former theatrical background, I used to be an actor in theater, I saw this as a set, and I saw infinite potential. And I began to I asked myself, what would happen if I introduced my political Black femme body, which is loaded, right, with so much history, with so much symbolism,
Powerful.
With so many contradictions, right? What happens if I introduce my body into this space? And so what I did is just begin to take the footage of myself in the space, but I also begin to gather and pluck petals and leaves, biological material from the garden and from the neighboring foliage and vegetation. And I begin to adhere those pieces of flowers and leaves and plants onto clear celluloid, 16 millimeter film. So very much in the tradition of a Stan Brakhage, right? Avant-garde filmmaking techniques, direct animation. I am adhering material onto the film. And this is what's creating these kind of almost kaleidoscopic, microscopic filmmaking material that you see, this kind of cinematic collage. It's splattered with paint.
Beautiful.
And it's moving very rapidly. It is what is tying the world together, right? It's tying the concepts together. It's almost like a connective tissue. So we started there. We started just in the garden. And then I went home after 2 months and I sat on that footage. I didn't know what to do with it. Then I edited it all together and made a 7-minute film called Giverny 1, Négresse Impériale. And I decided to juxtapose my time in the garden and my footage in the garden with what was happening at the time, the Philando Castile murder. But we withheld, in an act of refusal, we withheld the bloodied and dying, traumatized Black body, right? You do not see him at all. You hear what is happening. In fact, the flower material on the film is covering, right? It's in place of this body. So the audience member then has to do the work of filling in the gap. We're not providing you with the kind of neo-digital lynching postcard, which is very much in the kind of aesthetic and white supremacist tradition of America. We're withholding that from you. And so you have to do this kind of psychological work and deal with what you are hearing and let your brain fill in the rest. And that demands a kind of subjective response from the audience member. So we started off with Giverny 1, and then it kind of ballooned into the Giverny document. That's where we introduced the Vox Populi, woman on the street interviews. I decided to position myself in Harlem, and I wanted to only talk to Black women and girls. So we've got a young girl who's maybe 6 years old at the time, all the way up to a grandmama, someone who's probably in her 60s or 70s. And we're asking them, do you feel safe? Do you feel safe in your body? Do you feel safe on the street, on this block? And as you mentioned earlier, we get a wide variety of responses. But I would say the general consensus would probably be, no, I do not feel safe. I do not. So, yeah, one thing I should mention is that these two works are also a part of the suite of films, the Giverny suite, which is a 3-channel installation. Everything is kind of encompassed in the suite. Giverny 1 is in there. They're all kind of working together. Giverny document. Then you've got 2 other projection surfaces on the left and the right. This will be installed at the Museum of Modern Art come September.
Wonderful. Okay, that's great. That's lovely. Basically, what I was going to ask you, because you are in the film, and was that a difficult decision to locate yourself within that film space?
I thought it was super important for me to locate myself in that film space. In a way, I'm serving as every woman, right? I have to, in some ways, implicate myself as well, because I am a Black woman who lives in America. And in fact, this might seem coming out of left field, but there is a class critique in the Giverny suite, the Giverny document, and Giverny 1. Who gets to go to the garden, right? Is the garden in and of itself violent? What sort of violence am I encountering in the garden? And how does that differ from the violence that someone like Diamond Reynolds, the fiance of Philando Castile, how does that differ from the violence that she is experiencing? What is the responsibility of the Black people who find themselves in the garden to those who are outside of the garden? So there's a class critique to be had. And for me, it was important to place myself in this position as a form of implicating, right? Because yes, I come from working class Black people, but my reality now is I am very much in close proximity to the elite, right? By way of what I do, by way of the institutions that I have studied in, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to kind of, create a tension there. And I think my body does that. Also, this is an intimate work about the body. So we need my body. My body is my first home. And I introduce myself often in my works. This isn't the first or the last time you will see me in work.
Yeah, lovely. And also, with the in the garden, that for me there were religious references, the Garden of Eden, and there you were. Eve in the garden with the apples, so there was that as well, that was political,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
I think go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say the beautiful thing about quote unquote experimental film, because I often push back on that label, but the beautiful thing about, we'll use it for now, of experimental film is that it is open to so many readings. It's open to so many interpretations. Yeah. It's so rich and it's so vast. It really depends on where the viewer is coming from. So I've had people who have an art or an art historical background be able to wax poetic on, the implications of the Black figure in Western art, right? I've had Black feminist thinkers talk about the making of modernity, right? And how enlightenment is figuring into this piece, right? So there's just so much that you can pull from. Yeah. There's so many readings. And that's why what we're interested in. We're interested in many valences. My practice as a whole, my project as a whole, is to breathe life into the tropes, right, that Black people have been saddled with. Whether we're talking about the mammy archetype or the buck, the brute, the tragic mulatto, the sapphire, these tropes that we see historically, but also contemporarily in mainstream image making, mainstream cinema. We see this often still. My work is a counter to that. I'm attempting to push back against these flattened depictions of Blackness. Yeah. And if we have to do that in an abstracted way, then so be it, right?
And interestingly, you've said that there are so many people who've been able to interpret your work in so many different ways. And I'm assuming from your perspective, what you're making a work that has relevance and resonates with you and your politics and so on. So not necessarily trying to address any of those other readings that's still coming out, that's still surfacing.
I guess I wouldn't say that I'm completely disregarding art history. I know the importance of the Impressionist movement and people like Monet and Monet. I also know that there were no Black women in that garden when they were painting in there, right? So I think it's my job to kind of intervene in many respects. So I think, yes, in some ways I am thinking through some of the things that maybe an art historian would be thinking, definitely thinking through many of the themes that a Black feminist scholar would be thinking. I'm reading their works and attempting to conceptualize and contextualize what I am doing here. For example, there's a talk by Dr. Horton Stillers called Shades of Intimacy. And it's all about Black women in the 17th and 18th century in what would become the United States and Haiti or Santo Domingue at the time, and France, and their lived reality. So she's considering this notion of touch as a metric for freedom, right? Can you ward off the touch of another? And if you cannot, that speaks to your reality, that speaks to your condition during this time period. She's thinking through the act of sexual assault and sexual congress between those who own people and those who are bonded, those who are owned, right? And how this was part and parcel of enslavement and how that created these alternative shadow families. She's also thinking through these notions around the flesh versus the body, right? Who is a body? A body has juridical protection, right? Under the 14th Amendment. Flesh, though, which was the condition of many enslaved Black women, flesh is open and available for anyone, right? Which is why I titled the show Flesh That Needs to Be Loved, which is a quote from Morrison's Beloved. Baby Suggs said this. So I wanted to think through these ideas around bodily autonomy. Can we, even to this day, can we ward off another's touch? Are we susceptible to the harm of, those who have more power over us? Do we have autonomy over our first home, which is our body?
Yeah. Can we talk about voice? What does voice What does voice mean to you? And perhaps you're already saying it, explaining that. But what does voice mean to you, and consideration in your work?
Wow, I mean, that's a really great question. It's so wild because I told you that I used to be an actor, and the voice and the body are paramount. Those are your instruments. And it's wild that even though I'm not in a theatrical setting anymore, the voice and the body are still my instruments. Performance is still, key in a lot of the work, and point of view, the specificity of what I am saying and who I'm saying it to are still very key in the work. So to me, voice is everything. And I had a difficult time when I first began to make films. In fact, the reason why I wanted to switch from being an actor to being a director was because I wanted my own voice. I wanted my own depiction of what Black womanhood was and is. But when I first began, it really depends on what sort of program you find yourself in, that that determines whether or not your voice will be heard or whether your voice will be championed. And it was difficult for me initially. But that sort of resistance, I've learned, it's actually a galvanizing force. If someone is saying, no, don't do it this way, do it that way, I double down. I'm all the more focused on doing it my way. So for me, it has really been about how to use the voice, use all of the tools available to me, whether they be avant-garde filmmaking techniques or archival material, what have you, cameras, whatever, in order to uplift and make space for my unique voice and what it is I'm trying to communicate. So it is absolutely paramount in my practice. My voice is absolutely paramount. Yeah, I'll stop there so that I'm not rambling.
No, you're not rambling.
But yeah.
So, I mean, you have a style. Your work has a style which represents you and your message. So I suppose in a way for me that is also your voice. Your work is also your voice. What you produce
Absolutely.
is what is also your voice. It's unique.
Absolutely. I love that you are bringing in style, because as Black people, it's really important for us to kind of put our own little mark on it, our own little stank on it, as we say down here. It's imperative for us to not be like everybody else. We walk different, we talk different, we do our hair different. And for me, it seems as though filmmaking is this final frontier in which we're not fully actualized in our voice just yet here. And I think it's because there is such a stronghold over the means of production in terms of the industry. And so folks feel like they have to flatten their voices. They feel like they have to muddle down their own particular style so that they can gain entry into these spaces. And, that might work for some. But I think it's really important for us to do what we have done in the space and the realm of music, to bring that ethos of individuality and innovation over to the film space. When you think about jazz musicians, or even when you think about rappers, everybody's got a style.
Yeah.
They've got a different and unique style and a different sound than the next person. And you don't want to be caught copying or sounding like anybody else, right? But film, I feel like we're still playing it safe, despite the many advances and hashtag representation matters, despite how many wins people have gotten. That's great. That's nice. But, are we making things that are going to resonate with audiences 50, 100 years from now? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Bill Gunn is dead and gone, God rest his soul. But that is what I'm talking about when I talk about style, right?
Yeah.
Wendell Harris of Chameleon Street fame. That is who I'm talking about. Julie Dash, Colleen Smith. When I talk about style, I'm talking about that. Charles Burnett, John Akumfra.
Yeah.
That is who I'm talking about. So I think aside from winning in Hollywood and getting this deal and being in the trade, how can we push our creativity and really posit our own particular voice in the space via the medium?
There was some directors that you didn't mention there that I thought that perhaps some might consider to be more successful than the ones you did consider. Whereas but with those names that you mentioned, you know, they forged, they knocked down barriers, they clear, yes, they had their own style and they didn't compromise on that, did they? So yeah, absolutely.
No. And they create space. They create space for other opportunities and possibilities to emerge.
You have to be true to yourself and what you do, don't you? Really, that's really what it is.
Absolutely.
Would you say that you're an artist making feminist works, or you're a Black feminist whose work is motivated to correct a gendered injustice, or neither?
I think I am a Black feminist who is making film works that are attempting to definitely create to bring about redress and to bring about restoration. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that we need more Black feminist filmmakers to the front. I think that there is a huge imbalance on who gets to tell our stories, even when we're talking within the realm of Blackness, right? Oftentimes it is a Black man. In fact, I named more Black men just now than I did Black women.
Yeah.
Drag me, Patricia. Patricia saying, yeah, you did, actually. Listen, I love a critique. I have no problem. Drag me. But who often gets the opportunity?
Yeah.
When we think about Black, when people who are outside of Blackness think about Blackness, they think about Black men.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But for me, I'm interested in the voices of the most vulnerable, right? What does a Black trans cinema look like?
Yeah,
what does a Black queer cinema look like?
Wow, yeah.
Right? So I think that, you know, I'm doing my little part over here, but I feel like there can be more space clearing.
Yeah.
And that suggested.
I suppose that comes to this whole idea about the burden of representation, and is it the artist's job to feel the need, the burden to represent, or is it the artist's job to just be and do and to be true to themselves? And I suppose that's down to what individual artists feel that's important to them, maybe.
I think it's the artist's job to be true and real to what is coming up for themselves, but it's also the artist's job to understand that they are part of a collective. Whether or not you feel like you have to represent the collective, at the end of the day, you are accountable to the collective, right? We are African people. We are Black people. And individuality, I'll quote Dr. Kokava Zauditu Selassie, who is featured in my most recent film, Quiet as It's Kept.
Right.
She says, individuality cannot sustain Black life, cannot sustain Indigenous life. We operate as a collective, right? That's how our worldview is, that of a collective. So you are an individual, but you are in relation to others. Yeah. And I have to think about that when I'm making my work. So it doesn't feel like a burden of representation for me, but it feels like a kind of guiding rubric, if you will, right? If I'm thinking about my audience, which are Black people, Black femmes, Black queer folks, Black working people, that is going to inform the type of work that I make and what I am including in my work, the content of the work, because they are the context for the work. So, I mean, sure, do what you want. You are an artist. That is the whole point. But who are you speaking to is my question.
And that's really interesting, Jatavia, because I then, as you were talking, I then thought, is that a gendered approach? Is that
perhaps
exactly?
Yes, I don't know if the Black man director will think that way.
Exactly.
I have no idea. But it definitely it speaks to a kind of feminist approach. It definitely speaks to the ethos of women who are working. We have to think about someone else beyond ourselves because there are children to consider.
Exactly.
There are old folks to consider.
Interesting. Can I take you back to the garden just for a quick moment? That scream,
Yes.
your scream. Was that planned? Was it spontaneous? Was it as a result of that the jogger coming and hassling you? It was an eruption of emotion and anger, and I just thought, wow, was this all part of the storyboarded process, or was this something that just needed to happen at that moment?
There was no storyboard, I will say that, but I went into the garden with the express purpose, the explicit purpose to scream. Definitely.
Right.
The scream might have even been the first shot, if I remember correctly. I remember saying to myself when I first entered the garden, when there were thousands of people there, oh, I need to come in here and scream.
Wonderful.
Right? This space invokes that because of everything that I had been experiencing. So yes, there is some planning, but there is also kind of this response, the response to what is definitely happening around me.
A contextual response. You already mentioned Diamond and Philando. And that we don't deserve this, that was, for me, punctuated by the text that comes up on screen, not for long, but just sufficiently to make that powerful statement, we don't deserve this. And I watched an interview where you said, I think, your rage was the best thing that ever happened to you. What did you mean by that? Can you remember?
I mean, even if we want to, yes, I think so. Even if I can't remember, I know what I'm feeling now. An ecstatic experience even was made from a place of rage. I think from 2015 through about 2019, for sure, much of the work is rage-filled work. And much in the tradition of Lord, I see my anger as something that is very useful. Right? This is not a waste. It's definitely something I want to work through and continue to transmute and transform. But it is a galvanizing fire in my belly. Right? It helps me organize my thoughts, and it helps me push forward when I am afraid. When I am afraid to make certain types of work. When I am afraid to say certain things in public. I am connected to the realities of, the majority of Black people, the collective of Black people, when I acknowledge this rage, right? Because it is a true and it is a real experience, a true and a real response. So, an ecstatic experience was a direct response to what was happening in the United States at the time, which was, of course, more police murders. Yeah. And, it is a rage-filled film, as is this one. Yeah. I had to have some place to put this.
You're speaking for so many, through your work. It just touches so many and, in a personal way. It really touches in a very personal way. There's a real understanding about the lived everyday experience, and that's evident for me in your film. Going back to Diamond, shot 3 times because he had a busted tail light, and so straight away that rage sort of fires up. And I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking how remarkably controlled she was in the moment.
Absolutely.
And then there was you on the bridge, the scream, that cry out, the anguish, and then followed by composure, dignity, poise, and calm, and you turned and walked away. And what a powerful moment in the actions. So it epitomised so much the heartache, melancholy, hopelessness, unrelenting lived experiences. But then the walk away, we bear it and we carry on, and just in that, just no words needed. I just thought it was just so beautiful, which is, pleasure. Thank you. In just so, I was going to say so clever, so astute, so astute, so wonderful. But if we go, so you mentioned an ecstatic experience, which opened the images, the opening images provides the social context for the film. And I remember watching it and thinking, well, just having that feeling, that marginalised and oppressed existence of the people who were just wanting to be and to live and to just exist. Yet there was, for me, always that shadow of death, very real. You know, anyone could have burst through the church doors and disrupted the religious process. There was a real disquiet for me.
Yeah.
And you use boxes and split screens, which I'm really interested in because I use those. And I just wondered if you minded talking about what they mean. I mean, if you don't want to, you know, you might not want to give away the sort of artistic elements, and that's fine if you don't want to. But I really...
It's fine too.
Okay.
No, it's totally fine to talk about it. I think, are you referring to the boxes around Ruby Dee's space when she's doing the...
Yeah, I mean, I think I know what they mean to me, but yeah.
And that's important as well, I think, you know. And this is why sometimes I do give my little spiel about why I'm making choices, and other times I'm just kind of like, you tell me. But I will say now, because it's important to me what the audience is thinking. For me, though, that entire segment of the film in which Ruby Dee is performing a dramatized monologue of an actual slave narrative. This is an actual historical account from a woman named Fannie Moore. And this is about, of course, containment, but the impulse or the belief that at some point there will be a transcendence of our current reality, which is that of containment, which is that of enslavement and imprisonment. So that is why we are seeing various, you know, shapes around her, specifically boxes. This is a kind of reiteration of the containment. But we're also seeing things like halos. We're also seeing things like stars. We are also seeing a kind of split screen. At one point, she says, "The Lord showed me the way." And once she says Lord, the screen splits into three, right? Because we are thinking about that kind of embodiment of God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, or perhaps the Mother, the Daughter, and the Holy Ghost, right? So I am hoping to respond. My goal was to respond to what was happening in the frame, but as well as her voice, what she is saying. I'm looking at her facial features. I'm thinking about the actual material, the text, the slave narrative, but bringing all of my own experiences to bear, right? This is mark-making, hand-drawn animation directly onto the surface of the film, etching into the emulsion. And so this was a really intimate process that lasted for several months, maybe about 2 or 3 months, with me just working with the Ruby Dee portion. So, yeah, the box is about containment, but the entire piece is around these notions of transcendence and fugitivity, you know, breaking out, getting out, moving out, maroonage, as one might say. So that's why you also have the Assata Shakur interview.
Loved it.
Right? The woman describing her escape.
Yeah.
Only Black woman who has escaped from the American prison system is still free to this day. There's a $2 million bounty on her head to this day. So this is considering notions of ecstasy. Like, can we think about ecstasy outside of the sexual realm or even the sensual realm? Can we consider it in through the idea of transcendence or fugitivity?
And I have to say, when after being beaten by the master and she's still able to exclaim that she is free, you know, I thought, for me, I was thinking, how was she able to do that? To what point did she, as you say, transcend? How was she to get to the point that despite everything, she was free, she felt free? And then you juxtaposed it, as you said, with Assata Shakur, who basically was physically free. She actually was able to do that.
There's a tension there. There's a tension there, and that, I mean, again, going back to this kind of like Christian or this Black faith tradition, there is a practice of speaking things that are not as though they were. It's a kind of prefiguring your reality by claiming it, by naming it, even if those are not the conditions right now. We're going to go ahead and speak it as though it is there. We're going to go ahead and give praise and thanks because we know it is on the horizon, right? But there is a tension there, right? She's just suffered some blows, and here she is. You know, I'm free. She's claiming that. And perhaps we also have to think through, what is freedom? There are plenty of people walking around right now who can move about the cabin freely. But are they really free? What's going on in their internal space, in their psychic space, right? I'm a millennial. Most of the people in my generation have all sorts of addictions, right? We live in the modern age. We're all addicted to something. Some might say that there is an alternate forms of slavery that are not necessarily chattel enslavement, having to do with the body, but have everything to do with the mind, perhaps. So I don't know. There, again, multiple readings, multiple questions. To me, a work is successful if it creates questions in the minds of the viewers. They don't walk away knowing the last word or having the last word. There is no last word, right? It is only further provocation, further opportunities for curiosity and exploration.
Just thinking about your pieces as well, archive seems an integral part of your work. How important is archive in what you do?
It's very important for me. You know, it started off as me, you know, simply just being transfixed by the texture and the kind of haunting quality of the materials. I'm really blessed, very lucky that I have a great aunt. Her name is Mary Lee Dunn. We call her Aunt May. And she had a camera in the 1970s and the late 60s. She had a Super 8 millimeter camera. And she would travel to various parts of Texas, which is where my family is from, and Arkansas, which is also where a portion of my family are from and still live, as well as Los Angeles, California, which is where many of them migrated to. And she filmed both sides of my family with this camera. And my mother showed me this footage in the early 2000s. She had a VHS where it had been kind of digitized. And this began my love affair with the archive. Home movies, basically, began my love affair with the archive. But as I continued to go to school and to create work, I understood that the archive was a place of contestation, was a place of violence, that it had been assembled by somebody. It's housed at an institution oftentimes, right? And there are rules around who is included, who is excluded. There are acts of erasure in the archive.
Whose voices are heard, whose voices aren't heard.
Absolutely. It is a colonial project. So I thought to myself, well, how can I continue to work with these materials while intervening on these practices, on these methodologies of indexing, collecting? How can I make sure that we are, again, restoring and redressing what has been removed, erased, or harmed? So that is, you know, a lot of the emphasis around my engagement with the archive. Oftentimes it is personal archive that I'm working with. Other times it is not, you know. Sometimes I'm working directly with the material of film, right? 16, Super 8, etching on it. Other times I'm working with digital images, still and moving. But they do add, in my opinion, especially when my hand and the mark making is involved, they add a life force. They imbue the work with a kind of energy that feels very much kinetic and alive. And I think this is what separates my practice from a lot of my colleagues, this intimate engagement with the material.
With the past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Yeah, great. So are you currently working on an exhibition or just completed?
Yes. I did just complete one, but I am currently in the middle of working on two.
Right,
This is a very eventful year. I was really blessed to have a solo exhibition at a gallery in New York, the Paula Cooper Gallery, which is the gallery which I'm working with at the moment.
Right.
I had a solo show there, and it was called "You Smell Like Outside," which is a Black Southern phrase.
Right.
It is a phrase that, of course, to me invokes the kind of particulars and specificity of language, because it is indeed a Black Southern phrase, something that your mama would say to you when you were coming in from playing.
Right.
It is not wholly derogatory. It signals to a kind of intimacy. There's a sweetness to the barb, right? Get on in here and clean up because we're about to eat and you smell like outside, you know? So this work was centralizing, at the center of the installation is a film called Quiet as It's Kept, which is also a very, kind of particular Black phrase. But the work is a contemporary response to Toni Morrison's novel, The Bluest Eye. And the phrase "quiet as it's kept" opens the book. So that is where we took the title from. So that work was there, as well as a lovely neon piece called Citational Ethics, Zora Neale Hurston, a part of the Citational Ethics series. But I'm back in Texas, which is where I live and where I am from. And I'm gearing up for a solo exhibition at the museum down here, the Dallas Museum of Art. And it is called "I Know It Was the Blood." That is the name of the exhibition.
What's it called? I Know It Was the Blood.
Oh, right. Wow. Because we're thinking through ancestral inheritance, right? Those heirlooms we were talking about.
Yeah.
So I'm using actually a great deal of this footage that I got from my Aunt May as part of sculptural pieces.
Right.
Yes. So you'll see a lot of archival.
So have you shown in the UK?
Yes. I'm still waiting on my solo exhibition in the UK, so you need to call up the Tape and the Serpentine and let them know that I'm ready.
I'll do my best because I want to see them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I think that the Giverny Suite would be wonderful at one of your major institutions.
Yeah.
But what I have done is shown the Giverny document at Berwick Film and Arts Festival. And I'm losing track of another festival. There's smaller, maybe London Short Film Festival. We have screened the film works, the kind of one-off film works, not the installations, at a few UK festivals. In fact, the Edinburgh. Oh, right. I know that's not London. I know that's not Britain, but it is UK.
Yeah.
The Edinburgh International Film Festival. I think we screened An Ecstatic Experience and Giverny won. I think we might have even won an award there. But yeah, they have been a really friendly collaborator with us. But I would love, Patricia, an opportunity to have a solo exhibition and to screen one of the 3-channel work there, and perhaps maybe even try for BFI at some point, because I do think London audiences would be really, and not just London, all over.
Oh, absolutely.
There are Black people all over.
Absolutely. And it doesn't just appeal to Black people. I know we had the conversation, it touches wider than our communities.
Absolutely.
Let's see, shall we? Let's see what we can do.
We'll theorize on it, we'll theorize on it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Jatavia, thank you so much for sharing your work, your voice and everything with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and getting some fascinating insight into your work and your thinking and as you as an artist. So thank you so much. And I look forward to today that I can say and feel that I'm free in that way.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Patricia. Thank you so much for having me. And best of luck with the conference. I'm grateful to be included.